and welcome to the A.D.H.Deep-Dive, the show that's not about ADHD, but is filled with proof it exists. My name is David J. Mund, and this week I'm joined by my friend and former teacher, Rich Spicer. Rich is a morning radio show host for the radio station 107.9 CDY up in Cadillac, Michigan. He also works for the news station that I used to work for, 9 and 10 News. And he's also a teacher at the Wexford Missaukee Career Tech Center for the Digital Media Production Program. That's actually where I first got my start in high school on this type of thing that we're doing right here. I learned a lot of my first initial video, photo, and editing skills in that class as a senior in high school. So this week, we kind of talk a lot about that. We talk a lot about what it was like being a teacher during the pandemic, and also the type of sensitivity training that teachers should have. We talk a lot about just some of the struggles that students carry into class every day and how important it is as a teacher or a mentor or a friend to just be sensitive to those things and sort of allow people to feel their feelings in class, so long as they're not in interruption and such. Anyway, it's a great episode. Rich and I have a lot to talk about. And I think you're going to love it. So thank you for joining this episode of the A.D.H.Deep-Dive, and let's just get right into it.
One of the things that I'm most proud of is the fact that we've got so many former students who are working in Cadillac and in media. So
yeah,
two current students working for me at the radio station running basketball games. Yeah.
Now, is there a hierarchy of investment of time that you put into it? Like, what is if you had to rank your passions from teaching radio and television, is there something that you've always said, this has to be my shining star, or is it just whatever calls to you in a particular time of your life?
Well, teaching has become a lot more important in the last 5 years, but I'm a radio guy through and through. So
sure.
I don't ever see a point in my life where I won't be doing that.
Sure.
But, I'd say my life is probably 50% teaching, 45% radio, and 5% 9 and 10.
All right. So for the uninformed, just for listening, you're the morning radio host of 107.9 CDY, which is a top 100 hits radio station?
Top 40. Yeah.
Top 40.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about where you started in that? Had you done radio before 107.9, or was that your first gig?
My first job out of high school, 1 month out of high school as a 17-year-old, was at my hometown radio station, WATZ in Alpena. And it was something that I wanted to do. I wanted to I grew up listening to the radio, and I heard those people on the air, and I always thought I could do that, and I'd like to do that. And that's where I started. A month after graduating high school in July of 1988, I was hired in to run Detroit Tiger baseball broadcasts.
Hey,
and that was 1988, and then within a month, I did my first air shift. And my mother still has the tapes for my very first air shift, and I can't believe they let me near a microphone.
Whoa!
I listen to those now, and just it's cringeworthy. It's terrible. I was awful.
Don't we all do that though? There's a moment where we first find that passion that we sort of gaslight ourselves into believing we've been doing it our whole lives, and then when we go back and reflect, we're like, wow, we were. Oh, it's cringy. I look at some of those things I made in your class.
And I was just going to say, some of those first time projects, that our students actually come back and look, or when they get midway through their second year and they look at what they did only a year and a half ago. Yeah. And they say, gosh, that was terrible.
Yeah.
No, it really wasn't. You were learning.
Are you familiar with the, oh shoot, it's going to escape me now. It's essentially, it was pitched to me as, I think it's just called The Gap, but it's essentially, it's the taste gap. Do you know what that is?
No.
Essentially, the theory is that when we're disappointed by our own work, that typically implies that we have great taste because we can see what it is that we want to achieve. We can see that what we have made can be better because we have an understanding of what a well-developed project is, but it's the difference between having practiced and accomplished that and like just having gotten started. So I think in a lot of these creative fields, people are either again, they gaslight themselves into at the beginning to believe that they are truly great, and then they go back and they reflect on it and see that it's garbage, but that's okay because we knew what we wanted it to be like, and the only way to get there is essentially through practice. Yes.
That makes sense. That makes total sense.
Now, in radio, did that sort of apply to you? And were you like did you just like the generation of radio, or were you like a big Stern guy, or what was your approach to radio at the beginning?
It's hard to say, when you're just starting, you're opening up a microphone and you're trying to figure out what to say.
Yeah.
And when I grew up, my hero was Casey Kasem.
Okay.
I love to listen to American Top 40. I love to listen to him tell stories about the artists and educate us about, who the artists were and where they were born and how they got to where they were. And that's a lot of what I did. Certainly initially is I tried to be informative about the artists, and that was my contribution to my air shift besides just playing the music.
So was it always adjacent to music then when you started? It was less about like being a personality and more about doing like attaching yourself to music. Let me toss it back, I guess, to maybe the school days. Did you dabble in music or musicianship back in the day?
No, but I come from a family full of musicians. In fact,
okay.
It's interesting. My mother is 80 years old, and she goes out and she does gigs just about every weekend in and around Alpena. And she is the least 80-year-old person you would ever expect. She's not going to be caught sitting in a rocking chair. She goes out and she plays music with her friends and
skydives into the venue.
No.
Oh, okay, no.
We'll fall short of that. But
okay.
But she just keeps herself busy with music. And my grandmother is in the Guinness Book of World Records for having had the longest career as a bartender, 78 years.
Whoa.
Actually 79, from age 21 to age 100.
Whoa.
And that bar, which is called Maplewood Tavern in Alpena, is a hotbed of country music. So I was around music from the time I was young. I never really took on any instruments, but I sure could play the radio.
Now, can I ask what just to call out the age, what was the era you were growing up in? Like, is this like, or what were the decades you would consider that you were growing up in? I'd say what year were you born, but more importantly, when were you fundamentally understanding what you were interested in?
I will tell you, I was born in 1970. I'm 52.
Okay.
So, my coming of age really was the early to the late 80s.
All right. There are some would say that might be the best time to have grown up. For music, rather, for interest in music.
I'm not going to argue with it because, when I first became a fan of Top 40 radio, it was 1980. Those were the pre-MTV years. MTV became, more about how it looked rather than how it sounded.
Sure.
So one of my favorite years for music was 1980. That was the year that Christopher Cross's Ride Like the Wind and Sailing came out. And just a ton of really other great Cars by Gary Newman, just a lot of really great songs. And that's, that is when I really got into music, was about 1980. And again, that was pre-MTV. So, the entirety of the 80s started with kind of a light FM kind of sound and ended with rock and rap becoming part of the equation.
Yeah. Now, I mentioned Stern. It doesn't necessarily have to be Stern in particular, but were you into talk radio, or was that just not at all?
Not at all. I do host a talk radio show here in Cadillac. For the last 3 years, Katie Huckle and I have done a show called Cadillac Unscripted,
Mm-hmm.
which and we've interviewed just about everyone who's anyone in Cadillac, and the concentration of that is the good things happening in the community. You listen to talk radio today, it's gloom and doom, and we want to be kind of an antidote to that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Now, when we say talk radio, do you now consider that adjacent to podcasts as well, or do you see them as different entities?
I don't see why they can't be one and the same.
Sure.
Our show gets posted to YouTube. We just, we slap our logo on it. We don't, we're not running cameras while we're interviewing people. And, I kind of think people might be a little more apt to be a little more honest without the cameras rolling anyway.
I agree.
So yeah, our show goes to YouTube, and there's really not much that separates that from a podcast, from what you and I are doing right now.
Sure. I will say I definitely have noticed that in my own personal life, is people who aren't as comfortable on the camera, who are like having these well-intentioned, well-informed conversations with me before we start. As soon as they see themselves, like visually they see themselves, there's like I have to act or present this certain facade. So I do understand that. I think the main catalyst for me starting a video version along with the audio version was that it's adjacent to my career. That it was like, this will help me get better with key lighting and like, framing things in a proper way. But also, again, I'm a soft narcissist. I like the attention on myself. I don't know.
As I noticed that you just adjusted your shot to make room for headroom there.
You're very right. See what you're seeing is the Zoom conversation. I've got my camera off to the side here, and it's actually shooting this way. So you're in this left third, and I believe you're going to be in this little pocket down here, and then I don't know if you've seen the video version of my podcast.
I have watched a few. Yeah.
Out of curiosity, not to put you on the spot, but did you happen to see the Frank Youngman episode?
I did not.
Okay, that is the one that I'm trying to recommend to some of my old teacher friends, if they would ever be so interested in being on the podcast, because that was just, I don't know, maybe it was more based in selfishness that I just wanted to talk to this guy who started my creative journey, or at least helped fuel the start of my creative journey. But also I don't know if you have any history with the guy, but he's just a very down-to-earth, wise guy. And, and just having these conversations with teachers is important to me to gauge some sort of evolution of self that we'll get into our relationship as student teacher. But there were times where you had to maybe stop fights, like physical fights between me and others. There was vocal arguments.
I did.
You did.
I did. I most certainly did.
Yeah.
You and a student that I won't name.
You can even say it, and I'll just beep it if names come up.
No, yeah, that's I've yeah. So
sure.
Yeah, I mean, you were and are a pretty intense individual.
Yeah,
and that was still, and I've been in that classroom now, David, for 10 years. That is still the only time that I have had to step between two people.
Interesting.
And I thought at the time, holy crap, is this going to be what my future looks like? Am I going to have to diffuse situations like this? Fortunately, that's the only time so far that I've ever had to step in and kind of throw some water on a situation that was burning a little bit.
We will kind of stack the timeline properly, because that was, I want to say, probably more towards the middle or towards the end of the year. But to supply context to the listeners, it was simply that myself and a girlfriend had just broken up, and I was very sensitive about it, and somebody in class was just harping the joke a little too far, and I had not even considered exploring my anger issues yet. I lashed out. I think, I mean, what is your, I feel like I've been in so many near altercations in my life that they all sort of start to blur together, which is not a great thing, just to be clear. I'm not taking pride in that. This is sort of that taste gap, but for how you're supposed to act as human. Like, I know I was supposed to be better than that, but like I didn't know what to do to get there. What was your observation of that, really? I mean, or more yet, we can get there in just a second. What do you remember as your first observation of me as an individual?
I knew you knew what you wanted to do,
Sure.
but I don't at that age, and I don't think anyone at that age really knows how they're going to get there. But yeah, I mean, you were always a very intense individual, and you were not someone that I would have ever wanted to have been on the bad side of. But
you never have been, actually.
Well, I'm glad we wouldn't be doing this probably otherwise. But but yeah, and that was my first year in the classroom. So time has taught me a lot about emotions.
Mm-hmm.
It's taught me that if somebody is acting out in class, they're not acting out just to act out. There's a reason.
Yes.
Something's bubbling under, and you just described to me what was happening, but I wasn't aware that was happening at the time. All I know is I just had to step between two people who were just about to throw hands.
Yeah.
But in the years since, I have come to the conclusion that so if there's a situation that arises like that in the classroom, it usually involves me pulling someone out into the hallway and saying, "Hey, what's going on in your life? Mm-hmm. Is there something we can do? Is there something we can do to help you? Talk to us. Let it, I mean, don't, and not punish the act, but try to get to the bottom of why the act happened."
I think the notion of generational trauma can often go unrecognized, or the idea of generational trauma can often go unrecognized in classrooms. Now, I'm not a teacher. I've surrounded myself with friends who are, but even the teachers are like, they've got some shit going on at home. Sometimes there's family issues or money issues or just regular world stress issues. And so there's blinders on for some teachers too when they come into class, that like, we've all got a job to do. We've got a curriculum to get through. We got to get done with it. So yeah, there are some teachers who see a disruption in class and just go, just get out of my class. Like, you need to go. And that's where it stops. Mm-hmm. But I think one thing that I have observed about you and Frank and Cammie and other good teachers in my life is that there was some understanding that like there is some stuff going on at home. Clearly, these are defense mechanisms to be perceived in a threatening way or perceived as a I don't know. I guess I don't know exactly what I'm trying to say. I'm just saying that you approached it the proper way through my eyes.
Well, and also, sometimes even the most well-adjusted student, I mean, 11th and 12th grade is a hard time in life.
Yeah.
You're just finding yourself, you're trying to figure out what you're going to be, who you're going to be, what you're going to do. And especially, those last few months of the senior year, when aunts and uncles and grandmas and grandpas and moms and dads are saying, "Well, you're about to graduate. What are you going to do?"
Yes.
And there's a lot of students who aren't ready to answer that question yet, and they don't want to be asked that question.
Right.
Because life as they've known it for 13 years is about to come to an end. Yep. And what are they going to do next? So that's something you have to be really, really sensitive to, I think.
And one of the things that I've been pretty candid about on this podcast so far, it's a thing that like I'm kind of still embarrassed about, but I've been able to work through it to whatever degree I'm supposed to. I was what is known as a super senior. I spent a 5th year in high school, and that was the year that I had you as a teacher. And so there was not just these feelings of shame that I was definitely feeling in the time, because I was disappointed in myself ultimately. But I think the reason that I became so disappointed in myself was just like what you're saying. There are so many expectations put on a kid, let alone a kid with anger issues and ADHD and a desire to be loved, that like by the time everyone else was proven right, that like you keep acting like this, you're going to fail, you're going to end up. I remember a particular person in my life, and I'm not going to say their name, but they are somehow related to me. They said there's I was like 10 years old, and this stuck with me. And I guess I want to get your read on it too. They said there's two types of people in the world, which is already an oversimplification in my eyes. There's two types of people in the world. There's the people who dig ditches and the people who tell other people to dig ditches. And he said, if you keep continuing the way you're continuing, you're going to be digging ditches for the rest of your life.
And you were told that at 10 years old.
10 years old.
So here we stand, like what, 28 years later, or 18 years later.
18 years later, yep.
And that still has a profound effect on you.
It really messed me up.
So, and I always think of that, as someone who spends time in the classroom and is a mentor to our students. Don't say anything like that.
Yeah.
Don't say we all can point to things that were said to us when we were younger that either completely destroyed you or motivated you.
Correct.
One of the two things. And I've had students who have confided in me about things that were said to them. And how do you undo that? What can you say to someone who has had that kind of profound thing said to them, so profound that it shapes their thoughts years later? What do you say to them to undo the damage that was done by some adult that thought they were caring in that moment by saying something like that?
Well, I think the difference is that a lot of students aren't looking for that. They aren't looking for a teacher to fix it. What they want is just empathy, right? They want
someone to listen.
Someone to listen. They want to feel like the expectation, if they've got an abusive, whether it's physical or emotionally abusive household, they're not looking for you to call the cops on your parents. They're just looking for you to tell them that, like, it's okay. Like that will not happen here. We accept you for who you are. And that doesn't mean that they get to get away with everything in class. That doesn't mean they just get to be a blanket interruption because we feel empathetic for this kid. But, like, it's horrible when a kid is, when these expectations are expressed onto a kid, and then they get to school and those same exact expectations are placed on them by their teachers too. And it's like, well, I'm just letting everybody down. I'm not. And then, you get separated from your friends sometimes because you get kicked out of class or whatever. So it's like, I don't have my family. I don't have my teachers. I don't have my friends. I don't have my peers. I am now, it's like the ISS philosophy. Like, you are alone. You are to be removed from the group.
And you don't ever want to have a student feel alone. It's interesting in digital media production, in our class, we attract the creative kids, obviously.
Sure.
And the kids who are coming to our class, as a general rule, not all of them, but they're trying to express themselves. They're trying to sometimes get away from an undesirable situation, and doing that through creative expression in our class.
Yeah.
And David, as well as I do, we get those kids 2 hours a day.
Yeah.
And we get them during their 11th and 12th grade years, which, as I had just mentioned, those are emotional years. Those are difficult years. So in some ways, we spend more time with them during their 11th and 12th grade years than even their parents do. So we have a responsibility to feed that creative expression, to, I don't want to say let misbehavior slide, but invest in them.
Yeah.
Let them know that we're on their side. And I've stayed in touch with so many former DMP students over the years. I feel like I have 500 of my kids out there after, in the last 10 years. And, it's fun, especially to watch the kids who struggled in the class find themselves, become successes, and celebrate their successes with them. I actually have a former student who is a realtor in Lansing. And I just reached out to her just last night and said, we've got these things called client points in our classroom that Miss Cook requires. And what's to say you can't send me pictures of the homes you're trying to sell? Grab your phone and do a tour through the house. Send us all that, and our kids can make something for you to post on YouTube or help you. Um, it's all about relationships, David. It's all about relationships.
I love that. Now, I guess to paint the scene a little bit, can you, in your own words, sort of explain what DMP is? Because that's where we met in, I believe, the second year that the class existed, but your first year as a parapro.
That's right. So it actually was I think it was the third year it existed.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. Yep.
Cami had like one student at Cadillac, and then the second year was at Cadillac, and then the first year was at the CTC. There was I think 11 or 12 kids, and
which is just for the sake of it, is a technical center. Career. It's CTC is the Career Tech Center.
Yeah. It is a building, and not all career technical education programs exist in their own building in the state. Yes. But in Cadillac, it has its own building. It is actually celebrating its 50th anniversary this year.
What?
Yeah. It was built in 1973, and it was established through a millage. Cadillac is a very blue-collar town, so the CTC was actually established to fill blue-collar jobs that were available in Cadillac.
That checks out.
It has evolved a lot since then. In fact, I think one of the biggest things that people don't understand about it in the community is it's no longer the school where the unteachable kids go. The kids who are struggling in high school, it's not that way anymore, and it does have some sort of a stigma that's still attached to it. But David, over the years, digital media production has had a valedictorian from their homeschool in our class, and we've had 2 salutatorians that came from our class. So we've got the CTC has smart kids coming to us. And not necessarily the ones who aren't college bound either. So,
well, yeah. I want to interject real fast, because for me, it really felt like, for a person who I knew very early, at least with the expectation that you're going to go tens of thousands of dollars into debt, college was not for me. It just wasn't. I was not going to have your traditional college experience. So being at CTC sort of felt like, I'm going to my class, I'm going to work on my major, but on the way through the hall, I'm going to see somebody who's going to the mechanic shop, or somebody who's going to the health and wellness center. I don't remember what it was specifically called. And then there was some people who were working with like food, and, everybody, it came, I hear what you're saying in that it was seen as where the unteachable go. But my view was that it's like, people who know that they don't want what they're supposed to want, but that have not quite found their thing yet. It was a workshop for them to kind of explore that.
Yeah, exactly. It's sort of like a mini college for 11th and 12th graders, because it's a melting pot of schools. We have 12 different schools that come to the Career Tech Center, and some of those students come from a long, long way. Now, when you were there, the CTC did not have Grayling students. It did not have Houghton Lake students. It did not have Bear Lake students.
This is all news to me right as this moment.
And Brethren students. I mean, some of those students ride a bus 2 hours a day, round trip, to get to the CTC. So we need to make that time worth their while.
Absolutely.
That's a long time to spend on a bus. The Houghton Lake students and the Grayling students come to us because we have really good offerings. We're getting kids out, not just digital media, but all the programs are getting kids out with job skills. And like you, You knew you were not going to do college. You knew you didn't want to go tens of $1,000s into debt. And those kids have job opportunities right out of high school, and that's
Mm-hmm.
what we're preparing them for.
I mean, quite frankly, I was hired by Northern Michigan's news leader right out the gate of a high school job. That's
You
not
were
something. That's not something that you can get just anywhere.
Nope.
So it
And that's
provides you with
something,
experience.
and that's something we're very, very, very proud of. I mean, the folks at 9 and 10 and the folks at Newsnet in Cadillac know that if we're recommending someone to them, that we're confident that they have the skills to fill that entry level position.
Now, heading into the job, with pretty much your experiences mostly in radio at this point, right? Like, what were the expectations that were placed on you as a parapro?
Basically, the parapro's job is to assist the instructor, and it really depends from class to class on the parapro's level of experience.
Mm-hmm.
So, I came in to the parapro position with 24 years experience in radio, and I had already been at 9 and 10 as an operations person for a year before I started at CTC. So I had a little bit of television background. Always behind the scenes, never in front of the camera, because I've got the face for radio. But
but man, what a voice for radio.
Gee,
the compliment
thanks.
Still stays there. You have an amazing radio voice.
I appreciate that. But yeah, that was 10 years ago, and my position in that space has evolved, because I'm kind of the guy who has the direct contact with the people who do the hiring. My boss at 9 and 10, there's an opening in operations. He's sending me an email. Do you have anyone for me? And it's that's nice to be in that position. And I'm happy to say that, my success rate for kids who have worked out in those jobs is pretty high. So I'm satisfied with that.
Well, again, we can get into this stuff in just a little bit. I would argue I had a different takeaway from that news job at the very end, but there is no denying that the experience that job provided me, like, has substantially helped my career overall.
Oh,
so,
absolutely.
Like, even though I had, attachment issues to the job itself, like, it really did shape a lot of what my career ultimately turned out to be.
And really, David, we try to tell our students, there's no such thing as a bad experience. You can say it was a bad experience, but if you learn something from it, it really wasn't.
Yeah.
That's what career and technical education is all about. It's as much about finding out what you don't want to do, as what you do. So, yes. If that makes sense.
What I'm fascinated by, actually, is that as I do more and more things, like more jobs that I'm signing, I'm realizing as I get further in that I actually I still don't really know what it is that I would like to do. But yeah, you can't learn those things until you come up, or until you butt up against these things, and then realize ultimately that you're not doing what you wanted to do.
One of the things that I've always thought about you, David, and I could be wrong about this, but you're a very restless kind of guy.
Tell me about it. Tell me more.
You are always looking 3 steps ahead of where you are right now to try to figure out where you're going.
Yes.
Not everyone is like that, but you've always had this vision for your future. Even if you didn't know exactly what the vision was, you knew that whatever it is I'm doing right now isn't necessarily feeding my soul.
Sure.
So you're a reckless kind of guy, not reckless, restless kind of guy.
Reckless may also apply, but I think you're objectively correct there. Obviously, I could excuse. I mean, this is the A.D.H. deep dive. I could excuse away that's ADHD, and I'm just going from one thing to the next. But you've also mentioned this to me in the past as well, that, like, you've helped me get a lot of jobs, or you've been my reference for a lot of jobs. And one of the things that you have said to me was how honest you were with the employees, and you essentially, or the employers, and you essentially said that same thing, that, like, David is very capable, And then when David is given a task, if it's something he's passionate about, he will thrive in it. If he's not interested, you're going to know very quickly. And then he said that like I can't guarantee David's going to stick around for 5 to 10 years. That's not something that I can guarantee. Which ultimately
that's just me being completely and totally honest.
It needed to happen though.
Yeah.
You know, like that kind of stuff. You've got to be honest about that kind of thing. A, with an employer, but B, like, don't it sets up these false expectations of me as a person if I get into that job and they're like, oh great, there's this guy we can push around for 5 to 10 years. When I don't mean that I was being pushed around, I just mean like they're not going to view me that way if they don't see me as that. If they think that I might not be there for very long, then they're going to use me for all I'm worth, and then I'm out of there. So, but as far as digital media production, it's the third year of the class.
Yeah. Oh, we never really talked. We should talk specifically for your audience about specifically what digital media production is. We didn't.
Sure.
Yeah. I know you asked me that question, and then we kind of,
but it's okay.
Circled around. But digital media production is a class that basically teaches future storytellers how to tell stories.
Yes.
With video and audio, how to navigate your way around cameras, how to edit video. There are some radio aspects. In fact, right now in our class, we are writing radio ads. And then the next step is going to be making television ads, a 30-second or 60-second television ad. So that's what we're doing. And, content creators are out there everywhere.
Everywhere.
And what's going to give them a leg up is being able to know better how to tell a story.
Mm-hmm.
How to use those things like Adobe Premiere, video editing, even Photoshop, all of the Adobe suite kind of things to make a storyteller out of these kids. And that's kind of what we're doing. We're not necessarily feeding students into the television realm, although a lot of them do go in that direction. Not necessarily going into the radio realm, although I do have one former student and 2 current students who are working for me. And I got to tell you, David, that's the most fun thing, is I feel like I'm giving back to the industry that's been so good to me.
Sure.
I had people back in 1988 and 89 who took me under their wing, and I remember them fondly. And I feel like life has come full circle, and that's what I get to do now. So I'm really happy about being able to be in that position. So yeah, that's what digital media production is. We're about content creators, and we did not to toot our own horn, but we were in Grand Rapids at the end of January, and Cammie Cook and Derek Lahr and I won an award for being one of the top programs in career and technical education in the entire state.
Wait, Derek is with DMP now?
Derek Lahr is, yes, Morris Langworthy got a full-time job at Newsnet, and Derek joined us about a little less than a year ago.
He was a photojournalist at 9 and 10 for a while, right?
He was the chief photojournalist at 9 and 10. So
hey.
he is now our parapro.
Whoa, that's huge.
Yep. So and he's added so much to our class, and the kids love him, and he's a natural born storyteller. He knows cameras and editing inside and out, and he's been a great addition to our class.
Now, when you first started, obviously there was, I mean, for me, it's still relevant. YouTube was the avenue for individual creators. Mm-hmm. But now there's obviously TikTok is the biggest one, but then any vertical content. Has that changed your strategy in the classroom? Like, are you working with vertical video, or are you mostly still teaching people the traditional approaches to film and radio?
The traditional approaches to film and radio, I think, are going to work in any on any platform. I really do.
I agree.
Obviously TikTok is more bite-sized. Mm-hmm. But yeah, if you can teach a kid to tell a story and tell it in an entertaining way, and get eyes on what you're doing, it's all good.
I will say the personal experience I had was in our year we did a music video project, we did a radio ad project, we did a mock trial of Orson Welles, um,
Yes, and
and
that was actually, David, that was my first week as
oh, you're
a
so right,
CTC Parapro,
Judge Spicer.
yeah, and I got to put on the judge's robe, and I was like, man, I've just fallen into the greatest job in the world.
Yeah,
And that was fun.
I didn't expect us to talk about that, but now that we're talking about it, I want to talk about it more.
Sure.
We the what's the word I'm looking at? The project was essentially the class got together and held a mock trial of Orson Welles for his it's not an audio what was
It was a radio broadcast of War of the Worlds.
the radio broadcast of War of the Worlds, which was
it
essentially it freaked a lot of people out because they thought that what was happening in the story while being broadcast live on the radio was actually happening.
Mm-hmm.
And so the trial was, is Orson Welles guilty of stoking public panic?
Right.
And there were two lawyers for, two lawyers against, well, two prosecuting attorneys and two defense attorneys. And it was myself and Chris Houghton were the defense attorneys. And I knew from the start that we had a losing fight. Because essentially, I mean, it was, if you put yourself in the time, it's hard to view that like objectively. There's the subjective, like, we're all panicked, people panicked in the streets, a lot of things happened, this guy's guilty. It's essentially like the difference between murder and manslaughter, like, or unintentional, or whatever. You understand what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
I still think we defended that case like way better than we should have. And we were robbed of an ultimate victory, but that's fine. I don't hold that.
And it's, you know, it was a very interesting assignment because you guys were, you had to take the position of someone in the 1930s who didn't have this. You didn't have this.
Yes.
Everything comes to you now through this.
Yes.
Radio was still fairly new. There was no such thing as television yet at the time. So people, I mean, that was a trusted medium, and it was the medium where how people communicated at the time. So it was you had to go back in time about 70 years.
Yep.
And imagine a day when radio was all you had.
Now, can you and maybe this is a tricky thing to do, but I'm going to be switching my camera battery in just a second, so I figured I'd give you the floor to at least describe it. At best, you can recall it the War of the Worlds story, what happened, and then maybe make some comparisons between that and this. If you've been, I mean, you work in the news, this new UAP UFO craziness that's happening, unless you're not familiar with what's happening.
No, I'm familiar with what's happening. It's a very interesting
and I'm going to switch the battery while you're talking about this. So
all right. Yeah, that's very, very interesting because, you know, I mean, nowadays, I think we are way less trusting as a society as we used to be. We and you can talk about what the factors are in terms of why we don't trust the media like we used to. I think that has to do with certain politicians who rile up their base a little bit and you know, make them mistrusting of the media, which, you know, David, that's very difficult for me because I know a lot of people who work in the media. You know, working at 9 and 10, some of those people are my best friends, and it's extremely difficult for their life's work to be doubted by people, for you know, the conspiracy theorists to shoot down things that, you know, they're working hard to present to people. So it's really difficult, you know, to see that happening. But yeah, it's we live in an era where we should know theoretically we should know everything about unidentified flying balloons, but somehow we don't.
So the War of the Worlds comparison by itself was essentially, correct me if I'm wrong, because it is so distant in my memory, and I was defending this guy, not prosecuting him. But it was essentially, there was a radio broadcast where it seemed as though aliens had landed. Correct?
Yes. And if you listen to the original War of the Worlds, I mean, the use of sound effects and the use of the voiceovers, the voice actors, that sounded very, very convincing.
Mm-hmm.
And there was just the one break in the middle that said this presentation of this. I forgot if I don't remember if the word fictional was used, but this radio drama is brought to you by, and there was just that break, one small break in the middle, where if you were listening to it and paying close attention, you would know that this was a play, this was a radio drama. But a lot of people missed that.
You are essentially, well, you're jogging my memory in a big way, because one of our primary defense points was the wet floor sign comparison, where it's like, if the wet floor sign is up, just because you didn't see it and you slipped does not mean that the company or whatever was at fault of the wet. You slipped. That did not work for our argument overall. But yeah, there was just one single break that essentially said that this is a broadcast, or you're right. I don't know if it said fictionalized, but by this point, people had already heard about halfway through and were like, oh shit, aliens are here. I've got to pack up my family and go. So you're not going to keep listening to the radio at this point,
Right.
So yeah, that was a fun little assignment that we had in class. But I will say the direct comparison for me is to forward to my eventual career as a photojournalist. My first and only full year as a photojournalist, because I worked at 9 and 10 for 2 years. I worked in the operations department with you for a little while, and then I became a photojournalist on the news side. And my first year was the 2016 election cycle. So it was the height of your fake news. It doesn't matter where you're from. If you're anything critical about those on a particular party or a particular candidate, then you're fake news. Like anything you say. So it became, that sentiment was weaponized. And then from there, although it is true, there are some general, especially with this, I don't feel qualified to get into the AI discussion, but like, it is harder and harder to trust what you believe or what you see and what you read by the day. And it felt like it was not started, but thrown into the spotlight by someone who was essentially using it for a political narrative. And so now it's like, I don't know. I feel like we're treading dangerous waters now, and I'm not trying to turn it into a political discussion. I just mean that while you're working in the news, that becomes a really difficult thing to juggle when everyone around you doesn't believe what you're saying, but it's still your job to report what.
So you noticed that was happening in 2016. Do you think that your career as a photojournalist and in news would have lasted longer had you started earlier or later?
That's an interesting question. I would say it wasn't so much the cycle that burned me out. It was that thing that we talked about earlier where it's like, okay, I've done this now. What's next? And I don't know, maybe I would have stuck around for a few years. But essentially, the only reason I wanted to go into photojournalism in the first place is because I had been doing an operations job for a year, and I was ready for the next thing. I had worked at a restaurant, then I worked at a movie theater, then I worked at a news station, then I worked on the news side of the news station, and then I worked.
It's that restlessness we talk about.
It's restlessness, David. But then I think about it, like right afterwards, my next job was as an intern for the Arts Academy in Interlaken. So like,
oh yeah, I had forgotten about that. I remember we recommended that for you too, and I thought, gosh, that would be perfect for you. And in a way, it was.
It was.
I want you to talk about that summer.
That summer was one of. It's honestly, when I reflect on it, it's a bit sad because I loved it so much that like it was the first job that I got into that I felt like I was right. Like I was right where I was supposed to be, but it was only an internship. So
Right.
my departure was no longer my choice. And one of the most beautiful things about that job was that I found musicians that have since become my favorite groups ever. I don't know if you're familiar with the Punch Brothers or Chris Thiele in general, but they came and did a master class, and I was just shooting the master class, and I had never heard of these guys. And ever since then, it's like, I mean, they're on. As soon as I finish this podcast, I'm gonna go listen to them on my car ride. Like, but it was my first experience with like, not just I took some of the information that I had as a photojournalist where you like sit down and interview people, but most of the time when I'm interviewing people at the news, I'm interviewing to tell a greater story that I already know what I want to tell. I already know the story I want to tell. I just want to get the right soundbite out of you. So I form my questions to get you to say the thing I want to say. When I was at Interlochen, I'm talking to these bright-eyed kids about what it's like to be in such a privileged position to have, because again, for the uninitiated, I guess the listeners, the Interlochen Arts Academy is essentially, it's sort of like what CTC was, except it's a private school and it's strictly dedicated to the creative arts. So that could be filmmaking. There's specific elements of that. So director's class or cinematography or photo. And then there's music classes. There's guitar majors and there's woodwind majors and then orchestral majors. And then there's dance and all that kind of stuff.
And you were surrounded by this incredible amount of creativity.
Yes.
And I know that had to have stoked you.
It did. It really did. Because it made me, I never know when to use the word jealous or envious, because I feel like jealousy is dangerous, but envy sort of helps elevate your understanding of what it is you want. Mm-hmm. So, but there was a bit of envy when I was around all these kids who I could now see for the first time were perhaps squandering an opportunity. And I'm like, if I was in your shoes, kid, like if I had this when I was your age, where it's just specific. But then I think about it too, is would I have hated that? I don't know. It maybe it lends itself to my I don't know if I still identify with this or if you can even shed it, but the concept of ODD. I just didn't like being told what to do. You know, that's a character flaw or a personality trait. You can decide whatever you'd prefer. But I just looked at this incredible opportunity that the kids had, and sometimes I just saw them like screwing off in class. And I wanted to be like, as a guy who's just documenting what's happening in class, like turn their head.
So you're talking about what was happening at Interlochen, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That like I observed all these kids with literally their futures right in front of them. They just have to take it. And some of them were like, meh, my parents paid for me to be here. That's why I'm here. And it's like, whoa, you have an amazing opportunity in front of you. But yeah, I learned so much at that job as well, because like when you're a photojournalist, you're working with a particular camera. You have a lot of locked off shots. You're really just trying to tell a story about local news. But when I got there, I was helping tell stories about where kids came from, their history, and why this is such a big deal for them to even be there. And then I got to learn through some of these master classes that these kids got to sit in based on their tuition. And I'm just an intern who's shooting this class and learning the same information as they are.
But you also had the freedom at Interlochen to be able to, because when you're in news and you're shooting a VO or you're shooting a package, you've got a minute and a half to tell a story.
Yes.
So I'm sure at Interlochen, you probably pretty much had the creative freedom and length to tell the story that needed to be told at whatever length it needed to be told, right?
Correct. Now, to bring it back to 9 and 10, though, as a photojournalist, that did substantially help my career because I learned a lot about interviewing, what it was like to even, I mean, you could essentially say it got me to this conversation right here. I love podcasting because there are certain things that I know I want you to say, but some people don't feel like they're allowed to say them unless specifically asked. So it's like you kind of just draw the best out of people through conversation, and then you take that little soundbite. The difference here is that I'm not taking sound bites, I'm just taking the whole discussion. But
Yeah.
and then more specifically to a camera, I did learn, because I was actually shunned from doing sweeping movement and trying to do really creative shots. Essentially, it's tell the story as simplistically as you can to get the point across. And in short form, like for video ads or commercials that I do for companies, the most important thing is get the story across, make the story palatable. So I did learn a lot from that. I think what burned me most about the news job is the overtime, in that, like, if I was there from 2:30 to 11 o'clock as a photojournalist, if it was 10:55 and there was no other photojournalists in the room and there's a fire 2 hours away, I gotta go cover it. I'm the only one in the building who could do that. And I wasn't really allowed to tell David's story. I was telling somebody else's story.
Well, and that's one of the things that we do tell our students. If you're going to go into a broadcasting career, there is no such thing as a 9-to-5 day.
No.
Almost no one works 9 to 5.
No.
So you have to be prepared to, work the overtime, to do what needs to be done. And if you thrive, and I know you do, David, if you thrive on never having 2 days that are ever alike,
yes,
that is the kind of career that you will enjoy.
Yes.
I one thing I know about you is you were never going to be a factory kid. You were never going to be someone who would ever enjoy doing the same thing day after day after day. I do want to go back, because you brought something up that was really interesting. You talked about how you saw a lot of kids who were wasting their time and their money at Interlochen.
Yeah.
When they had all of these things and all of these tools at their disposal and all of these people around them. I see a lot of that happening in DMP as well. And we will bring people who work in the industry to come to talk to the kids, and they will say, you have no idea how lucky you are.
Yeah.
I wish I had something like this in high school. And, you can talk until you're blue in the face to a 16 or 17-year-old who will not believe you when you say that. But I mean, if you were to come back and talk to the students, what would you say to them about, okay, you have these things at your disposal? What would you say to them? Do you feel like you wasted an opportunity in some ways in DMP?
There are many layers to what that answer would be, but I would say first and foremost, the blanket statement, if I was supposed to say one thing and then leave the room, is essentially like, I know you don't know what you want, and that is more okay than you think it is. That, like, your culture as a whole, at least for the past few decades, has placed this expectation on students that, like, you follow the algorithm. You go to school, you go to college, you get a job, you get married, you have kids, you retire. But that's not really a possibility. It's getting more and more difficult as generations go on. So, the first and most important thing is, like, it's okay for you to not know what you want to do. When I was in this class, I didn't know what I wanted to do. The most important thing is saying yes to opportunities that might be adjacent to what you want to do, because it is that rule out philosophy that we were talking about, where, like, you have to do something you don't want to do to realize it's not what you wanted to do. When I first got that job as a photojournalist at 9 and 10, I was like, I'm going to break the biggest stories. I'm going to go out with these reporters and tell them most amazing, fascinating stories about this murder or this cold case, when really I'm just sitting with a tripod locked off in a courtroom. But A, you're going to learn a lot from that. B, again, it's okay to not know what you want to do, because eventually, at least the hope, this is just projection, is that you will find that. But you're right. I don't think there is anything that you can say that will really whip a kid into shape to understand, because A, when I think about when I was their age, which is a weird sentence for me to say, by the way, when I was your age, but
you'll find yourself saying that more and more in the years to come.
I'm sure. it really is just they have to learn for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And all you can do as a teacher, and I'm sure that you know this, and I don't know if I'm in any way answering your question, is that like, yeah, it's not even your job to tell them that. It's your job to allow them to come to that natural understanding on their own without forcing it down their throat. Like some teachers can do, where it's like, no, you're either going to dig a ditch or you're going to tell somebody to dig a ditch. When really it's not that black or white, you know?
Yeah.
And maybe there are some parallels to that in your own career that like, did you expect that you would end up teaching kids?
No. Oh my gosh.
Right.
For the longest time, I just thought radio was what I was going to do my entire life.
Right.
And it still is. But I found over the years that I have a rapport with students. And I think that's because I listen to them.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's and we're, as I said before, we're lucky enough to have 2 hours a day with them, so we get to know them pretty well. We get to know about their fears and their hopes and their dreams, and the troubles they may be having at home, to the extent that they're willing to share. And I will say this, David, I was not prepared. And I know every person who's ever spent time in the classroom, especially in the last 10 years, will say this. I was not prepared for the amount of life coaching and counseling that I needed to do. And I'm happy to do it because, I want to see our kids succeed. And sometimes there's a roadblock. And if I can just have a conversation with them that essentially says, you know what? Despite what other people in your life say about you, you're good. You're going to be fine. That's the one thing about teaching, that you have to have a heart you have to have a heart for students. You have to have a heart for the kids. You have to have a heart for, saying things that help.
I think you mentioned something at the top just about how DMP tends to be a melting pot for creatives. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
people who want to express themselves.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if this seems like I'm telling you how to do your job. Obviously, you know how to do your job. I just mean like as a teacher in general, especially in a creative field, it is more important to just listen. That like they're gonna tell you everything that they are comfortable telling you. You cannot get more or less out of them. A kid who's an oversharer is gonna overshare. A kid who undershares is gonna undershare. But when they are given the opportunity to express themselves and they're proud of that, really all you need to do is just validate that feeling that they have, and like, you should be proud of yourself, even if you think this is a piece of garbage video. Like, it took courage to put yourself out there like that. Go ahead. Sorry.
You know what's really the most rewarding thing, David, years later, is just to have the kids come back to you and say, you know what, Spicer, you and Cook and Langworthy or Lar were the highlight of my high school years.
Absolutely.
I mean, what more can you shoot for as a teacher,
Now, I'm sure you have talked about this ad nauseum, but I would be remiss not to ask, as generally as you can put it, what type of wrench did the pandemic throw in that type of learning, especially early on when you were doing remote?
It was very, very difficult. Because you're teaching a hands-on skill.
Yep.
How can you teach a hands-on skill over the telephone, over a computer screen? How can you do that? Fortunately, we were lucky enough that there are enough, free downloadable video editing software options out there that we were able to, at the very least, teach basic editing and basic storytelling.
May I ask if one of those were DaVinci?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yep. A lot of kids use that.
That's about to overtake Adobe Premiere. I see it in the future. That like there will be a paid version that obviously you can. I mean, I think there already is a paid version that will give you more access to the things that like Adobe Premiere does. But right now, a lot of editors and cinematographers are switching to DaVinci right now. But sorry, go on.
Yeah. So it was difficult, but we basically, you know, you don't need to have a camera to tell a story anymore. Most phones have pretty high quality photography and video uh, capabilities. So one of our assignments during that period of time was show me your life story. A day in the life.
Love it.
Go out and take your phone and show us what you love to do. And that was one of the things that we had them do. But it was really hard. And not only was it hard from a instructor's perspective, but it was hard from the student's perspective because that particular year, that day in March, when we thought it was going to be just a week or two, because as I recall, it was the week before spring break that we found out on a Friday we weren't going to be there the next week. So we thought, okay, we'll just take 2 weeks off and we'll come back, and then we never did. And
was that the whole year you were out?
It started in March of 2020, and then we did not reconvene all year. And one of the things that we found out, and we addressed this actually on one of the shows that we did, our students go to Newsnet on Tuesday. Our second years go to Newsnet on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, and they have full use of a television studio.
Great.
And one of our students decided they wanted to do a show called Last Minutes. And it was shot in April, I believe, during the final weeks of that particular senior class's year. Mm-hmm. And we discovered that while all of the adults thought the kids had it made, sitting at home in their PJs and doing their assignments, the kids weren't digging it at all.
No.
The house was not the ideal place. It wasn't a learning environment. They missed their friends. And, that graduating class of 2020 and the graduating class of 2021, who were juniors in 2020, have a lot of lingering emotional trauma from that time.
Yeah.
And it's true that the kids wanted to be in school. They would have rather been at school than learning at home on their screens.
Yep.
And that speaks to the communal nature of high school. I don't know if you felt that when you were in high school, David, but you want to spend time with your people.
I think some of the underlying issues that, of course, that I don't know them personally, but that class I imagine took away from it was you have worked your entire life up to this point for this one moment where you get your diploma on stage, everybody's there, you say one last goodbye to your friends, one last goodbye to your teachers, and they didn't get to do that.
Closure.
There was no closure.
Closure.
And so when you ask me, like, what is if I experienced that during 2020 or whatever, or if I would have experienced that same type of thing during 2020, I don't think it's even possible for me to answer that because it is such a specific trauma to those people. In that it sort of felt like their whole life had just been a waste. And so now they end this with these resentments and these feelings about global leaders that took something away from them.
Mm-hmm. It was extremely difficult. And, this year's ninth grade class is this year's seniors were in ninth grade when that happened.
Holy cow.
And there are going to be lingering effects really for for at least a few years to come from
Well,
what happened in 2020, and also, part of 2021, because a lot of schools were, it was still different in the 2021-22 school year. I know in Cadillac they had a blue and gold arrangement where it was one day on, one day off, one day on, one day off.
yep.
No consistency there. So it was really difficult, and this is going to linger for a while.
Well, I'll ask a pretty pointed, subjective question. Well, first of all, the general consensus too is that it's not just these high school kids that were ruined in that way. If it's like kindergarten and first grade, like that sets you back some seriously fundamental years. I mean, this is where you're learning communication skills and socializing and your colors and your alphabet, and you've got to do that at home, maybe totally alone, because mom's in this room doing work, dad's in this room doing work, brother and sister are in these rooms doing their schoolwork. There's no human interaction at all. It's just me and a screen. But yeah, the more pointed question that I don't explain however you would like. Every generation has their fundamental trauma shaping moment, like 9/11 kids or Cold War kids, or throw it way back, people who grew up during World War II or the Vietnam War. This is different, right? Like what's happening now, this is different. It feels like there's always something, whether there's a war or a plague or a divisive presidential contest or racial riots, or it's just one thing after another after another. Is this new, or is this is what always happens?
I just think it's heightened. It's heightened because of social media.
Oh,
because
preach it.
because everyone has an opinion. And not only do they have an opinion, but some people put the best of themselves out there on
Only
social
the best
media.
of themselves.
And what happens then is you get into the comparison game.
Yes.
My life doesn't measure up to this other person's life because they have this going on and that going on. And people aren't sharing their weaknesses and their failures and their fears on social media. All we see is the good things. And so you get into the comparison game, and that's very, very dangerous. It's really hard. I've personally wished, David, that people couldn't have phones until they were 18 years old.
I gotta pick up on that sentiment there, because something just crossed my mind that I think would help maybe shape. You asked me what I would say to a class if I had to come in.
Yeah.
Nothing you see on this is real. Nothing is relevant to your community or your life unless it's specifically about that. I mean, if I read a news story about what happened in Cadillac, obviously that's a little bit different. But when you go on Instagram, you're only seeing the prettiest photos that people took of themselves. When you go on YouTube, you're only seeing the most exciting experience that a person had. They don't show you the trauma underneath. They don't show you the history of the difficult journey that they've been on. It's just the good, good, good. And then on the flip, it's hell, it's the war, it's the plague, it's the fights, it's the chaos. The only thing that is real and meaningful in a way that you're going to remember later on is not that Instagram post you saw last week, or not that Facebook story you read. It's the communication you have with the people sitting right next to you. That is the only thing that you're going to carry forward, because everything else is just a presentation of something that has elements of truth, but just isn't real overall. The world is not all good or all bad.
I totally agree, David, and I really think that it would be good if anyone under the age of 18 took this thing
and threw it away
and put it away for a day or two.
Yes.
Get out in nature, go have some fun with your family, forget about everything else that's going on. I don't think that the human brain, especially as a teenager, is ready to have everything coming to them through this. It's still developing. So, but how do you teach someone to do that when this has been part of their lives since they can remember?
Sure.
So, I totally agree, and that's that's going to take quite an effort.
Well, an issue that I'm observing that obviously Gen Z has come into their own, and there's even a group of kids who are now coming up after that I don't know what that generation will be called or is called, but Gen Z is still typically referred to as the youth. One thing that gives me some hope is that there is a particular chunk of millennials who do understand that. And in the past, I mean, I can even think specifically of conversations that we had with you in Cami in class where it was like, the back an hour a day conversation. We didn't have Facebook or Instagram or Snapchat or YouTube or whatever. But you can't say that to a Gen Z kid because everything they've ever, it's been there from the beginning. But millennials at least have that observation that like, yeah, no, I did grow up with the internet. I did grow up with social media. And I have still in my later years come to the conclusion that it is destroying us as a society. I mean, we were never meant to talk to everyone. We were never meant to know everything that's happening in the world always. There's the trope of like, you can only control what is within your control, so focus only on those things. But when you read what's happening in Russia, or you read what's happening in Florida, and you're up in this tiny little pocket of northern Michigan, like, it's hard to get a sense of like what you can actually control. So yeah, I empathize with that. I don't know what you do. I don't know how you convince a generation of kids that everything they've ever known is a lie. But to me, it feels like that's the only way we're going to get out of this, right? Is just focus more on, not in a selfish way, but, you can only be better to others if you do the work yourself. I mean, I'd love for you to be able to just come into class and tell all of your kids that they should go to therapy, but that doesn't feel like a thing that you're allowed to do. But yeah. Actually, that does, I think the combination of these 2 points leads me into a question I wanted to ask before. You don't have to like address specifics. But I know one of the biggest issues that teachers have right now is parents who disagree with curriculum. And maybe it's a little less specific with digital media, but when there's book bannings or anti-education sentiment to whatever varying degree across the country, how do you handle it when a parent comes in and says, I don't really appreciate, or maybe you might not have even experienced this, but I don't appreciate what's happening here?
In all honesty, in career and technical education, we're lucky in that way because, we're teaching skills. We're not teaching math. We're not teaching English. We're not teaching history. We're teaching skills. So I have not personally yet had any parent come, and I don't believe Cami has either, where they say, we don't like that you're teaching this or teaching that or teaching the other thing. And that's really, it's really hard, because going back to, the reporter and the Fojo thing,
yeah.
You are getting criticism just for doing your job.
Right.
And that's really difficult. And I feel for those teachers that have, those parents who are, helicoptering their children and what they're learning and things like that. But at the career and technical education level, I have not had that experience at all. And I'm very lucky for that.
That's great. Do you imagine going forward that there are, I guess we can use this as some opportunity to approach an ending, but what are some of the expectations that you have set up for whether it's yourself or this class? What are some things that you would like to do to expand or better or more centrally focus digital media production? Or do you feel like you're on the right track right now?
I mean, I feel like we're on the right track. I think where we really need to work harder, David, is in, have you heard the term soft skills?
Maybe elaborate on it.
So these are things like the ability to put together a good resume, the ability to sit down and interview with someone and look them in the eye, firm handshake, have a face-to-face communication. I think this generation needs to be better at communicating face-to-face.
Yeah.
Because again, we go back to this.
Yep.
There are kids who don't even like to speak on this. They do everything. They communicate through
Yeah.
texting.
Yeah.
They email. Email is something that's old-fashioned to them.
Email.
But
What's that?
email is exactly how communications in most organizations happen.
Yeah.
From employee to employee. So, I mean, that's something that we really need to emphasize in future years, is how to communicate face to face, how to place a phone call, and the right things to say. It's very interesting because just a few days ago, I had a student who had the cell phone number of someone who was going to be doing some hiring for a job that she wanted. But she readily admitted, I am not good on the phone. I'm afraid I'm going to say something stupid. And so that kind of, made a light go off. And I kind of think we need to do mock telephone calls.
Yes.
In our class, in addition to mock interviews. But what I ended up doing with her is, she said, is it okay if I send a text? I have her number. And I said, yes, but here's what I want you to do. Before you hit send, let me see it. And if I feel like it's not professional enough, or it needs to be massaged a little bit so that it's a little bit more professional, we'll do that. And so she showed it to me, and it ended up being the perfect tone.
Awesome.
And 10 minutes later, she got a text back saying, let's do an interview.
I love that.
So, and those are the little victories that happen in the classroom every day. And I think there is an advantage in us older folks being able to impart that wisdom to students who are open enough to take it.
Now, I got to say, I don't know if this is something that I would expect to see out of digital media or just classrooms in general, but I will just lob out something that I would love to see some creatively motivated teachers at least start working with their kids with. Right now, I am a freelancer. There's a constant conversation about the difference between the reality and the expectations of what it's like to be your own boss. That, like, when you're your own, when you're working for somebody else, your hope and desire is that I can't wait to work for myself one day so I can control my schedule. But now that I realize that I'm in control of my schedule, I'm working more than I ever have. And being my own boss, I'm my own accountant. I'm the person who's supposed to apply discipline in my own life. There's nobody micromanaging me. And that's extremely difficult as a person who wants to jump to one thing to the next, because I'm in the ways that it matters, I'm not forgiving of myself at all. I deal with a lot of self-shame.
David, I knew that this was going to be a battle that you fight all your life.
Forever.
You are not someone who is going to want to be beholden to somebody else's wishes.
Right.
It's the I knew that.
I think,
what are you getting at?
I think essentially, like, maybe a parting bit of wisdom as a person who has diversified their investments creatively. You work in television, you work in radio, you work as a teacher, you also have your own personal things that you care about. What is a way that you can tell, or maybe I'm not even looking for an answer out of here, but I would hope that there would be some way moving forward that we can communicate to these kids who do feel like me that, like, yes, there is an avenue where you don't have to, like you said, be beholden to the wills of somebody else, but that requires a lot more discipline than you may think.
Absolutely.
I would just love to see that be part of the communication, rather than, and I'm not saying you ever did this, but like, it seems black or white. Either you will work for yourself or you won't work for yourself. You can work for yourself or you cannot. You are not capable. Just seeing a bit more context in the classroom for what that might look like for someone. I'd love to see that maybe pop up in a way.
It really is all about prioritizing. People ask me all the time, how do you do this? You have 3 jobs. How do you, well, I balance it because I have a very understanding wife. And if you're going to go into this line of work, you better find yourself a really, really understanding spouse.
Whew. You're talking to a divorced fella.
So, and the key is to love it all.
Yeah.
For me, all of my jobs are they're like a jigsaw puzzle, and they all come together in a beautiful way where, I can assist my more worthy students in digital media production to find jobs and to find positions and to find careers. So, I mean, the key is to love what you do every day.
Yeah.
And you really don't work a day in your life if you love what you do. And I do love what I do. So yeah, again, it's about prioritizing.
And this may be a sentiment that I've pulled from therapy, and it may feel a bit cliche, but it's very important to know, and I'm still learning this every day, that like simply being is enough. Like you are enough just being here today. Like you're not always going to get it right. And more often than not, you're going to fail, and you're going to fail hard. And one of the things I continue to reference this video day after day, episode after episode, but I feel it resonates in my own life. I made a video called The Fear of Success and What Comes Next. Whereas I'm not afraid of failure. I'm not. I have bombed in just about every field that I could imagine. What scares me more is when I get a glimpse of what it's like to feel creatively fulfilled. And then just like we've talked about, I am afraid of what comes after that. It's like, am I going to lose my love for this one day? Am I going to just walk away and give up? Or am I going to chase this unachievable goal for forever? And yeah, just remembering.
Isn't it exhausting, David, though, for you to be constantly questioning yourself in this way?
Oh, do you see these eye bags, Rich? I'm tired. I'm tired. And again, you can't do it as a therapist, but as a teacher, but as a podcast host, I can say for anybody feeling that feeling like they're never good enough or that they'll never achieve, it's more important to talk about that than to fix it.
And I can tell you, David, that can come from a multitude of areas. I mean,
Yeah.
you can grow up with a demanding parent who made you feel like you will never amount to anything or you'll never be good enough, or you could work for a boss. And I have worked for a boss in my past that I questioned whether or not I was doing enough every day when I went into work, because this person had a way of making you feel that way.
Right.
And that is something that took me years to get past. Fortunately I had very, very supportive parents growing up, and I never really felt that way. But you can get into a job situation where you have a demanding boss or administrator or owner, and they can make you question yourself. Even the strongest person, the most confident person, can fall into that trap.
That's right.
If you end up working for the wrong person. So yeah, it can be difficult sometimes.
And a constant theme of this podcast thus far has been the conversation around imposter syndrome. And I'm finding out more and more every day that I am not even close to alone in feeling that everyone has their brush with imposter syndrome, feeling like they're not good enough, or that they're surrounded with people who judge them or shame them simply for being them. And that's sort of just an unfortunate, hard lesson that I think we all sort of have to learn in order to figure out what we want along the way, is that, we're the weakest link until we're not.
I have a high school senior who works for me at the radio station, and this person tends to really beat herself up when she makes mistakes. And they happen to varying degrees, but as a boss, my first thing that I say and I actually stole this from a fellow by the name of Ben Scripps, who was a director at 9 and 10.
Oh, I remember Ben.
Yep.
Former Jeopardy winner Ben Scripps.
Two-time Jeopardy winner Ben Scripps. Yes. and my initial reaction to when something goes wrong is, it's radio. Nobody died.
Very true.
It's okay. You make mistakes. As long as you learn from the mistakes and you don't make them again, there's a reason why those mistakes happened.
Right.
So it's okay. It's okay. Don't beat yourself up over making boo-boos.
You know, Rich, I think that is just about as positive a note as we could maybe end on. Simply being enough is enough. You are okay.
Yes.
Whether you believe in a higher power or not, what's going to happen will happen, and we have to just sort of embrace that as it comes to us.
Well, and I do believe everything in life is not what happens to you, but how you react to it.
Absolutely.
There are we need to equip our teenagers with better ways to react when stuff hits the fan.
That's right. And not throw hands in class as a high schooler upset about his girlfriend breaking up.
His recent breakup. Which is interesting because, David, that I did not know that until today.
Yeah.
Because at that point, I was brand new as a parapro, and I was not well versed enough to be able to have the wherewithal to remember to take a kid out in the hallway and ask, "Hey, what's going on in your life? Are you okay?" I would have understood a lot more about you if on that day, when I stepped in between you and that fella and stopped punches from being thrown, I would have understood a lot more about you if I had asked that question.
Yeah, I was just a sad boy. That's all. All right, well, you go ahead and hang out on the line so I can talk to you after the camera roll. But for the sake of being on the podcast, thank you so much. I really appreciate you. You are my friend, and you have supported me as deeply as a teacher could. And I really appreciate you for that.
I appreciate you, David, and your success is our success as digital media production.
Yeah,
and I look forward to continuing watching whatever it is you do.
Who knows?
And whatever plan you have now, where your head is already 4 steps ahead of where you are.
Yeah, I'm just going with it. We'll see what happens next week. I don't know.
Sounds good.
All right, go ahead and hang out on the line, and I'll talk to you in just a moment. But for the listeners, thank you very much, and I'll see you next week.